Sorry. Came down with a case of the Cookie Monster. 5, 6, 7, 8. Dee dee beep ba 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 ba. Ra ba 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 beep ba ba. Dee dee da da dee da da dee da 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 da. I'm going to try to remember to speak loudly because here in the guest studio in Long Beach, I forgot. I brought the goddamn boards, but I didn't bring the microphone. But hopefully this will work. And also, I'm going to make this quick because I am hungry and I want to get stoned. So, picks of the week. Whoops, I didn't look at the picks of last week. So, prepare to watch me flip through it. Okay, first up this week, I got Rogue State #1 from the good people at Black Mask Comics. This is as you can see, comparatively, this is an oversized magazine size, which my coworkers hate when they do that because it's hard to shelve them, and I'm not super fan of that format myself because of the shop, because it's hard to file them when they're back issues. But I'm the back issue manager. Thank you. It's largely a ceremonial title. It's largely a ceremonial job. So, I honestly don't know much about this. My boss actually kind of talked me into it. I hadn't planned on buying it, but it was his pick of the week. And, I mean, Black Mask is a very, I guess you could call them progressive comic book publisher. They very much wear their left-wing politics on their sleeve, and I don't have a problem with it. I totally understand others who might. And there's times where I don't particularly care for it, but not as much as when I was younger. When I was younger, I was like, keep your politics out of my comics. And now I'm like, yeah, I don't, whatever. As long as they're politics that I mostly agree with, not to be polarizing. But for one thing, there's not that many conservatives in the arts. I always think it's so weird when guys like Tim Allen piss and moan about not being able to get work because they're conservatives, when first of all, you're fucking Tim Allen. You've got 2 shows in syndication, for Christ's sake, and you work for Disney every fucking year, so you're not going to get any sympathy out of me. But it's always weird to me that if you're any kind of creative person, to be conservative is very weird. It's even, you see even, I think, less of it in comics. There's a couple guys, one guy in particular, I can't think of his name, but he's done some really good stuff. One of his books is called Ghostopolis, which I still really like. I don't see his name around much either these days anyway. He was buddies with Mike Nelson, who is one of the Mystery Science Theater guys, my favorite host of Mystery Science Theater, who himself is a very conservative fellow, but he definitely doesn't discuss his politics in his work. I'm really going off on a tangent here. I'm really just trying to remember this asshole's name. I interviewed him at Comic-Con in 2011, and he was a very nice guy. I had no idea at the time. And even if I had, I don't think it would have made a difference. I would have just wanted to talk to him about comics anyway. Anyway, what I'm getting at is that Black Mask is a very left-wing publisher, and I'm a pretty left-wing fellow myself, so I don't have any real problem with it being left-wing or whatever. And the guy who wrote this also wrote a book a couple years ago called Cal Exit, which I still haven't read, but I have been wanting to. It's about California seceding from the Union, which is definitely a topic I'm interested in. I mean, it seemed for maybe only a day or so, but there was some real serious talk about it during the quarantine. And to be honest, the only reason I'm not more aggressively for a separation of California from the United States is that I feel it's more or less already happened. Certainly morally, legally in a lot of ways. I mean, to say that the laws in California are far more progressive than they are elsewhere. I mean, obviously California is not a complete utopia, and there's a lot of assholes that live here too, but I wouldn't live anywhere else. To paraphrase Garth Ennis, anybody who lives anywhere else is fooling themselves. He said that about New York, but I say it about California. So yeah, this will be good. And also one of the reasons I made it a pick is because it's oversized and kind of a pain in the ass. So I like to read it first and get it out of the way. Also, this was my pick of the week for the shop. This is, can you even see? Can we get the soft filter off? I should turn another. Should I turn more lights on? I'm going to turn the kitchen light on, see if that doesn't help. Anyway, how was your day? Here I am taking up the whole thing. I think that works a little bit better. I'm going to try to hold it up on this side. Nope. Still looks like it's in shadows. Can you hear me still? That's the important thing. This is Murder World, Avengers #1. This is, I'm assuming, because it takes place in Murder World, that the villain Arcade will be in here. But I also can't see anything without my reading glasses. Alright, yes, he is. Okay, so, Murder World. Created by Chris Claremont and John Byrne? What did he draw it? You know, I'm not even sure that. I'm fairly sure that Chris Claremont. Yes, because it was. Okay, yes. Murder World first appeared in the pages of Marvel Comics in an issue of Marvel Team Up. I can't pull the number right now, but it was the team up was Spider-Man and Captain Britain. That's how I'm pretty sure it's Claremont, because he loves the British stuff. Real Anglophile, that Chris Claremont. In fact, I think he claims to be, like, I think he might have been born there, but, like, moved here when he was an infant. But he's still plain. I don't know. Who gives a shit? Murder World is a lot like what it sounds. It's a amusement park designed specifically to kill superheroes. Arcade is the guy who owns Murder World, and he's this little shithead, this little redhead, snot rag. He wears like a white suit. He's a real piece of shit. He's like, the way I described it in my little write-up for the shop is he's the most gleefully unlikable character in Marvel Comics. One of them, anyway. So, yeah, there's that cover of Marvel Team Up. They're both in a giant pinball machine. Gives you an idea. And then Claremont definitely wrote the X-Men stories. There was a 2 or 3 issue arc, I want to say, around the same time. And the thing of it is, these are like in the mid to late 70s. And when I read these stories in the late 80s, they were being reprinted because at that point they were a decade old. And that was always kind of, I remember noticing that with Mad magazine too. The super specials were always reprints, and they were always from 10 years previous. So I think Marvel did a similar thing. So I was reading these in the pages of Marvel Tales and Classic X-Men, which were reprint titles. But holy shit, when when the X-Men arrive in Murder World, one of the best Colossus things, I don't know how else to describe it. There's a thing that superhero comics do where they'll change their costume or they'll change their alignment. They'll become bad guys or something like that. It's just something will be off, and people will usually flip out about it, but this one didn't last that long. So when the X-Men are in Murder World, they all get separated, and then Colossus gets brainwashed into being the proletariat. Colossus is the giant metal-skinned guy who was from Soviet Russia, and he had defected to join the X-Men. And he was like, they were always very careful to make him an anti-communist, because you couldn't have a Ruski on the X-Men if he wasn't. But he becomes the proletarian, or the proletariat. I think it's the proletarian, because that sounds dumber. And that means it's in a superhero comic. Could you shred the furniture a little more quietly is all I'm saying. Well, the mic's not going to pick you up anyway. Yeah, so he fights Wolverine wearing overalls with a giant hammer and sickle on it. What more could you possibly want? I also remember that because Classic X-Men was, all the covers were drawn by Art Adams, and all the front covers were by Art Adams. The back covers were always by John. Fuck, I can never remember. I can't remember his name. He shares a name with that horrible, with George W. Bush. Speaking of politics, John Bolton, not George W. Bush's Secretary of State, and not the famous war hawk. John Bolton, the comic book artist. He always drew there was always a backup feature in Classic X-Men because there were no ads, and it was always drawn by John Bolton, and it was always a new story. So like Classic X-Men would have the reprint, and then in the back there'd be a new story, and it was almost always to do with the original story. So now it's like 10 years later, and Claremont would write a PS to the story that you saw, or a scene written from someone else's perspective or something. And Bolton's art was incredible, but the Art Adams front covers were really the appeal of Classic X-Men. And the Murder World one, is this really nice cover with Wolverine on the front, and he's got his claws. He's holding the Hulk's head in this hand, and he's got his claws up his neck in the other. And you can kind of tell it's a robot, but you have to kind of look at it. But at first, it just looks like he beheaded the Hulk. I mean, imagine being an 11-year-old boy and seeing that for the first time. Murder World. So I think this is going to be kind of like a 5th week book, but I think there's only going to be 3. This is one of these books they do. They did it with the Man Thing, Curse of the Man Thing a few years ago. Curse of the Man Thing, Spider-Man, Curse of the Man Thing, Avengers, Curse of the Man Thing, X-Men. I think they're going to do a very similar thing here. So beyond that, I don't know what the story is. Murder World was kind of like a cult. Arcade was kind of like, an obscure-ish character. But since I had read those stories very early on in my comic book reading career, I was super into the character. And then as I noticed growing up, when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, he started popping up more. And I realized, it's because I wasn't the only one 11 years old in 1988. So other writers who had started writing for Marvel were like, let's bring Arcade back. And the best was Avengers Arena. Well, I don't know best. Avengers Arena was a book, great book, where it was a Battle Royale, basically. Even the logo looked like the Battle Royale logo. If you're not familiar with Battle Royale, Avengers Arena is a story where all these teen superheroes, like Nico Minoru from the Runaways, and Victor LaMancha, I want to say, also from the Runaways, Darkhawk, even though no one had seen him in anything. And I think Dennis Hopeless, I think it was one of the first things that Dennis Hallam, when he was still going by that. I mean, the recycling's not doing anything to you. They all end up on a deserted island, and they have to basically fight, like in the film Battle Royale, or the Hunger Games, whatever horseshit, or Lord of the Flies, whichever version you prefer. The only problem, I like that because Arcade was in it a lot, and I do like him as a character, but it wasn't Murder World. Murder World is always, it's like, it looks like an amusement park, merry-go-rounds and Ferris wheels and stuff, but they're all, like, deadly. You know what I mean? Didn't have any of that in Avengers Arena. But it was still a really good book. And then it became Avengers Academy. Yeah. That was also, I think Avengers Academy might have been the first book that Giuseppe Camuncoli drew that I had read, and I was like, this guy is now one of my favorite artists. But that's really neither here nor there. Arcade showed up in that Black Widow series that apparently is not coming back, the one that Kelly Thompson and Elena Casagrande were doing. And I think I even messaged Kelly Thompson, like, thank you for bringing Arcade in again. Because I think after Avengers Arena, since I guess he had been in a regular book for a couple, because that book went for a couple years, I think. They kind of buried him. So he still pops up every now and again. And that's all I was really trying to get at. Trying to keep this short, aren't I? I also bought this week Blade: Vampire Nation #1. I was on the fence about this. I saw it on the list, but I wasn't sure if I was going to get it. Because it's written by Mark Russell, and I don't like to speak ill. And he has written some stuff that I like, but he's written a lot of stuff that I don't like. But I ended up going with it anyway, because frankly, Blade does not get enough. He never has. He's never really been around enough for me. When I was in high school, he was in the Night Stalkers, and that was not a very good book, but it was part of the Midnight Suns line, which was Ghost Rider was very, very popular at the time, and I loved Ghost Rider. So they kind of gave him his own, not his, but he had the Ghost Rider title, and then they gave him a title, Ghost Rider and Johnny Blaze, because this was when Danny Ketch was Ghost Rider. So that's 2 monthly Ghost Rider titles. Then you had Morbius, You had Night Stalkers, you had Darkhold, and I think that's it. Darkhold was about the evil. The Darkhold is the Marvel version of the Necronomicon, and the Night Stalkers was a team of three. It was Blade and two other extremely so minor that I don't even remember. One of them was Dracula's antagonist from the Tomb of Dracula from the 70s, but I can't even remember his name. It wasn't Van Helsing or anything like that. And then another guy. Blade would get he would get a one shot here and there in the late 90s, early 2000s, or, even when the movies were super popular, they never really brought him back as a monthly. And I think it's probably because he's not that popular a character despite everything. But he is one of the few black characters that Marvel has. Well, they have way more than they used to, but that was, to me, was always an appeal. And also, he has been on the Avengers for the last couple years. Jason Aaron's run on the Avengers is wrapping up pretty soon. But it's been a great run because Jason Aaron can do no wrong. One of the things I like about it is he's giving Blade a lot to do. And it's not just Blade stuff. But now it kind of is. So now, if you're not aware, in Marvel continuity, Dracula is like, public domain. So they could just use him however they want, really. And he had his own title in the 70s called Tomb of Dracula, which was drawn by Gene Colan, which is, largely considered his best stuff. I think it's better than his Daredevil stuff for sure. And then that was during the 70s horror craze, and that kind of petered out along with Kung Fu. And he went bye-bye. They brought Dracula back into Marvel continuity. I don't remember how they killed him off the first time, but they brought him back into Marvel continuity. I want to say like 10 years ago, maybe 12. And then he just kind of pops up every now and again. And that's the other thing too, is I don't really like vampire stories that much. I never have done. I'm a werewolf guy. But again, like I say, Blade is just a badass. But Dracula I didn't read as much. Currently, in the Marvel Universe, Blade, I think it was Blade. Was that during Curse of the Mutants? I'm not even going to try and watch me try to remember. But basically, Chernobyl is now where all the vampires live. Chernobyl has been given over to the vampires who just exist in the Marvel Universe, and Dracula is their leader. And then on Blade, I believe, is Vampire Nation, and so this takes place there. And I think Blade's kind of like the sheriff of Vampire Town, which makes sense. I mean, assuming you know who Blade is. Blade, half vampire, kills vampires. It's all very fun. Now this, I don't know if I'll get to this week, but I'm really going to try because I've been wanting to read this forever. Henry and Glenn, Forever and Ever, by the great Tom Neely. Tom Neely. I don't know if you're familiar with this at all. This is a series of comic strips that Tom Neely has done, I think with different writers. He's written some of them too. They're basically romance comics starring Henry Rollins and Glenn Danzig. I don't know if you're into the punk rock at all. I never personally much cared for Henry Rollins or his work. Danzig, on the other hand, really brings... it really kind of creates a problem for me. Because not only do I love his work, and I do, even though it's a little embarrassing. No, I guess that's not true. I mean, it does seem like, objectively, you should grow out of the Misfits, but, I mean, they're just too good a band for me to do that. But, not only is he a great artist, like, I really love his work. Obviously, his earliest work more than his later stuff. But he's also a little guy. He's a fellow short fellow. And, boy, can you tell. You know that thing where people will say you gotta watch the quiet ones? I always resent that, because I'm actually a quiet one most of the time. People are like, yeah, you gotta watch out for those quiet ones. And as George Carlin said, while you're watching a quiet one, a loud one's gonna come up and hit you in the head with a baseball bat. What I say to that is, you don't need to watch the quiet ones. You know, you need to watch guys under 6 feet who are super ripped. Those are the guys. And if you need me to tell you that, you're probably married to one. Yeah. It's so... Speaking, you want to talk about embarrassing. There's nothing more embarrassing than short man syndrome. It still overtakes me at times. Although, frankly, and happily, it was never quite as bad for me. When I was a little kid, and I was a pipsqueak, I was always the runt of my class. It sucked, obviously. But then, by the time I got into punk rock when I was 16, I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't give a shit about this anymore. Like, it no longer bothered me. It was really weird. It's still, like I say, it still flares up every now and again. But it actually, like, within the last, and certainly since I've become an adult, within the last 5 or 6 years, the only time I've ever been conscious of my height was when I was on a dating profile. Because every woman on every dating profile only wants to date guys over 6 feet. Good luck. So I don't give a shit. It doesn't really bother me. But, yeah. I can name you 5 guys off the top of my head who are my height and whose biceps are as big as my head. And they're not bad guys, but it's just such a fucking... Ugh, I'm going to get off onto this too much. That's Danzig for you, though. I love Glenn Danzig, and I really wish I could take him aside and go, honey, you don't need to fight everybody with your fists. Remember when he got the shit beat out of you? In the early 2000s? One of the first viral videos on the internet? You think he'd learn his lesson? Maybe he has since then. Maybe he's mellowed. So this book has been, or these comics have been, because he's always at Comic-Con, at San Diego Comic-Con. Because another thing about me and Glenn that we have in common is we're both comic book nerds. We both had a devil lock at some point in our youths. We both did not like the Misfits after a certain point in time. That's not true. I love American Psycho, which is the first Danzig-less Misfits album. Sue me. But yeah, the pull quotes on the back are one is from Hank and one is from Danzig. Henry, has Glenn seen this? Trust me, he would not be amused. Henry Rollins. People are extremely stupid. Glenn Danzig. He's not wrong there. So yeah, this is just a very fun book. This is a reference to Amazing Fantasy number 15. It presupposes that they're a couple. Because they are dear friends, and Henry Rollins has a Misfits tattoo, and I wouldn't be surprised if Glenn has a Black Flag one. It's so funny, though. Because that's the thing also. That's another thing about punk, was that not only did I have all these new sorts of idols to look up to, but I could also make fun of them. Like, that was encouraged. Glenn doesn't encourage it, nor does Henry. But the ethos of the spirit of punk in general demands it, in fact. Especially when, like, you can't take away the punk pedigree of these two elderly men. You can't. You cannot take away the fact that Rollins was in Black Flag for a long time and is still kind of the face of it. I mean, more than Keith, which is kind of a shame because I think he's better anyway. You can't change the fact that Danzig invented horror punk, not by himself, but he did a lot of the work. But you can fuck with them because they take themselves way too seriously, and that's why it's a pick of the week. And now picks of last week, which I'm going to burn through because I've already taken too long. Also, I've forgotten a lot of this stuff already. X-Men Legends number 4, the great Giuseppe Camuncoli on the front cover. This was great, exactly what I had hoped, except that it's only one issue. I was really bummed. I don't know. Javier Pina, great art, but he's not Art Adams. Like, I really feel like they must have tried to get Art Adams, but they couldn't. But it's still very, very good. Lord of the Jungle number 1. This was pretty good, and also they use the name Tarzan in it quite a bit. Maybe it's just something on the cover that they can't use it. As I mentioned last week, it's written by Dan Jurgens, whose writing in the past I've not been super over the moon for, but this is still really good. And the Benito Gallego, whose name I don't know, very Bern Hogarth, very early. Tarzan was a very popular comic strip during the Depression and around that time. And Bern Hogarth drew it. Hey, ladies, I can make a Bern Hogarth reference. It's also just a fun name to say. So they just kind of go over his origin again, which I guess. But then, okay, yeah. At the end, we see Tarzan as a middle-aged fellow, so I guess we'll find out how he gets there. Good stuff, fun stuff, great stuff. And then the Death of Superman 30th Anniversary Special, which apparently no one gives a shit about. I think I was one of the few to actually buy this, and my boss was like, And I don't blame him. It's an $11 book. With these oversized things, 10 at the most. It's almost like that extra dollar is just an extra fuck you. But yeah, this was good. You had all the 90s Superman thing. Oh yeah, so there's a story. The main story takes place today, and Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, learns that his father had died once upon a time. And then you see it from his parents' perspective and from Guardian's perspective. It's like a lot of just kind of basically just rehashing the 90s. I don't have a problem with that. I personally don't have a problem with paying $11. But I can totally see why anybody else might. That's too much for a trip down memory lane. You can buy the trade paperback of The Death of Superman for less. What does that tell you? Okay. I don't know what it tells you, but write it down and send it in. I apologize for the sound if it's inaudible, but you can just put the, subtitles on. It's 2022. That's how everybody does everything. All right, I'll shut up.